It's so nice to see you, man.
You too.
How are you?
I'm good. It's
Welcome.
really good to see you.
You too. You gave me this book many months ago. I read it, and then I listened to the audiobook again, and I'm glad I went through it a second time because there's a lot in here. And just even the concept of consciousness sparks so much debate and conversation. So just, if people haven't heard you speak about this before, why this subject? What did you try to accomplish, if anything?
Well, thanks for reading it twice.
Yeah, twice,
That definitely deserves a medal. Consciousness has always fascinated me. I think back when I was a kid, it seemed natural to be interested in this. And there was a point where I think every kid wonders something like, why am I me and not somebody else? And where was I before I was born? What happens after I die? And of course, consciousness is the heart of that, because that's everything we are. That's everything that matters to us matters because of how we experience being ourselves and the world around us. Mm-hmm. All we have are the collections of experiences of the world and of being who we are that get woven into some narrative over time. The story our brain tells ourselves about ourselves. And we each weave the story in different ways. Sometimes it seems like we inhabit the same world, and in some sense we do. There is a real world, it has real things in it. But our way of encountering this world, in terms of not just what we think about it, but in terms of the colors, the shapes, the raw sensory experiences, that can be distinctive, and I think is distinctive for each of us. So we're much more unique, perhaps, than we might realize.
I think that's what's really interesting about where we've grown as the more you dive into this, the more you realize that yes, there are real things, but it's essentially, well, molecules at certain speeds, and we're all kind of the same thing in this biosphere, give or take, and that this isn't about our experience. This is about the whole thing working together, the collective of the world and environment and nature and all of that. So I like the fact that we're more in tune with who we are. But the older I get, the more I learn, the more I read, the less I care about me.
Right.
The more I like about how we all work together.
This brings to mind, I think, something that's been this current in human intellectual thought for a long time now, which is this plague of human exceptionalism.
Right.
We as human species, we've always wanted to think of ourselves as somehow separate from nature rather than part of nature. You see this with the idea that the Earth is center of the universe and then that we're separate from all other animals. And most recently, this idea applies to consciousness and mind too. There's something exceptional about our brains, our minds, that is perhaps closer to some supercomputing AI than it is to another animal. And I rather think the opposite is the case. And it's been, I think, for me, a really important part of this exploration to understand human nature as part of nature, as continuous with the rest of other animals, but also the world in general. We are biological creatures. We're living creatures, and for me, this is this continuity, while recognizing that there are still some things that separate humans, that make us distinctive. The language we have, the ability to pass down knowledge from generation to generation in a rich way. Of course, we're different in ways that can be both good and bad.
In your book, I love how you do lean into the idea that our brains are prediction machines, and that we're kind of, in a weird way, our consciousness is so interesting in our poetry and reading. We have this ability to feel and try to put words to things to make them more understandable or whatever, but our brains are just constantly trying to predict. And so it's like we're working together with our brain, but almost we're working against our own brain. For my life, I've decided a long time ago, respect the laws of nature, suppress my own. Because my own nature is not good for me, right? And that's part of my brain. So I exist working against my brain half the time, or at least it feels that way.
I think it feels that way because I don't think, in many ways, you are your brain. So there may be different conflicting tendencies in this bundle of experiences of what it is to be George.
Yeah.
But there's no separate you that's working against any of this. But I've always found this, I suppose for about 15 years or so now, when I've been working specifically with this idea of the brain as a prediction machine, it's been very powerful. It's a very old idea. It goes in history back to Plato and then any number of people you can pick up over the last intervening couple thousand years. But what it does is it provides a way to understand the relationship between what we're experiencing in the here and now, what's out there in the world or the body, and what's happening inside our brains. Conscious experiences, and by the way, I guess we should say, I mean, this is not a complicated phenomenon. It's a long word, and consciousness has so many different meanings in the wider culture. You know, consciousness of social inequities and things is a very different thing from where it all starts, which is just the fact that there are some things in the world, in the universe, where experiences are happening. I'm sitting here with you. I'm more than a complicated object of messy biological stuff. I see you, I hear you, I feel the texture of the seat beneath me, and I experience myself as the recipient, the subject of all these experiences. And that's all we mean. I mean, it's just the fact that experiencing is happening. And it's very easy to take for granted. You know, we wake up, we open our eyes, and there's the world. What's there to explain? And the fascination comes, I think, when you try to get under the hood and say, well, we can't take it for granted. And we know you change the brain, your conscious experience changes, whether it's taking some drugs, having a brain injury, having even a cup of coffee, your experience will change. And it's not a direct reflection of what's really out there in the world.
It's just your experience.
It's your experience that is, I think, and this is still a hypothesis, this is still an idea, that what we experience is the brain's best guess of what's out there in the world or in the body.
How does spirituality and religion play a role in the way the brain works?
I think they can shed light on what we're trying to explain when we try to explain how the brain works. You know, the space of human experience is vast. It varies throughout the life, it varies across culture, it's varied across history. And there are so many insights from spiritual and religious traditions about the nature of the self, that it changes, practices that can induce change in experience, whether it's meditation, whether it's prayer. I think all of these things can be very complementary. The core lesson from both, I think there are many, but one core lesson is that how things seem is not necessarily how they are, and that this idea of a single essential self is probably a misconception. The self is a process that changes. This is more apparent in some spiritual traditions than others.
Does it ever get in the way of the science? Like trying to get people to pay attention to that? No one trusts scientists anymore. It's what, not no one, but you know what I mean.
I know, this is, it may be right not to trust scientists, but one should still trust science. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, that it's a practice too. You know, it's a set of heuristics, set of rules. It's a recipe for figuring stuff out that ideally doesn't depend on the trustworthiness of any individual scientist. Does it get in the way, this dialogue with religion and spirituality? I think it can do when there are conflicting answers. I remember going a couple of times to speak in India, and I think there's a lot of rich potential for synergy there, but it kept being restricted by this dialogue between what was said in Hindu scripture and what scientists were saying. It was hard to move beyond that. I hope that will change.
But generally, we self-medicate, we use social media that's completely hacked our brains in a way that people don't want to feel things, or at least that's what we're being presented. How do you combat everybody's desire to avoid that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a real danger, sort of the consumerization of feelings themselves. And we'll see this even more with what are called neurotechnologies, things that monitor our brain waves and train us to inhabit particular conscious states and not others, and in the limit, sticking electrodes inside our heads. All of these can be justified on the basis of clearly good applications, just like the videos of avatars of Holocaust survivors. If someone's got Parkinson's disease and you can relieve that by implanting an electrode in their brain, then yes, that's wonderful. But the same trade-offs apply. You know, you're giving corporations access to perhaps your most intimate data, the freedom to think, your own thoughts. And it may change people's behavior in exactly the ways that you're suggesting, that you get this easy out that you can go for, but that prevents a longer term process which is necessary for well-being. Right. So I don't know what the solution to that is.
It's like our ability to, I read a book and this author said that brains are just really good at problem solving. And the problem is we have created so much tech that the actual core of our brain just can't keep up with it. Like our biology is not designed for all the light pollution, all the noise pollution, the constant scrolling, the dopamine, all that stuff. Our bodies are not designed, because we're still not, you know, if you think about it in terms of evolution, we're not moving as fast as this is moving.
That's right. But we've been remarkably good so far. So you know, there's a note of optimism here too. With basically the same neural blueprint that we've had for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, we function pretty well in environments which would have been totally unrecognizable to our ancestors. People say that things are moving even faster now, and there may be some truth to that, so that things could be even more challenging. But you know, I think that the wonderful thing about the human brain, and without falling into the trap of human exceptionalism again, part of it is its adaptability, part of it is its flexibility. And as much as we're developing new technologies which have the potential to be incredibly disruptive, there are also the potential benefits that can accrue. I always like to think of technology as complementing our minds and our brains rather than replacing them. And I think this again is crucial in AI, where the trope seems to be towards replacement. You know, let's make AI like a human, give it a body and so on. But no, the best systems are the ones that work in tandem, that compensate for some of our weaknesses.
Do you have a practice that you can, that someone watching can, how to start their day to feed their consciousness in a healthy way? Are there things we can do?
I think so. I think the practice is very simple, really, which is to try not to take your experience for granted. Our brains are wired up so that we don't even notice what's going on inside our heads that generates this world full of color and shape and smell and beauty and horror and emotion. But it's all dependent on this incredibly complex electrochemical machinery, which is an everyday miracle. And I think just building in that practice of recognizing, even if we don't understand, and nobody, to be honest, nobody understands how this happens. We're just still at the beginning of the journey, I think. But the fact is it does happen, somehow. And it may only have happened once in the whole history of the universe, in one planet at one time in history, that matter, physical stuff, also felt. That makes it so much more precious than it might otherwise be. We cannot take ourselves for granted. And even a challenging experience is still an experience. It's still something. The fact that that experience exists is an everyday miracle. This doesn't mean that you should be happy about suffering. No, not at all. I mean, some states of mind are so negative, so aversive, that not being conscious at all might well be preferable, might seem to be preferable. And there's a different conversation there, I think. Right. But
that's why a lot of people take drugs.
Yeah, or commit suicide. Yeah. I mean, this happens, and I think that can appear to be rational. And sometimes it may be. The thing I worry about there is that, and I remember this from my days of being depressed, part of that is this feeling that how things are now will be how they always will be. And that's the other part of the practice. When you don't take your experience of being for granted, you can also recognize that how things seem is not necessarily how they are. That the emotions I'm feeling, that's my brain making sense of what's happening in the body in the context of what's going on in the world. But that can change. You know, you change the way the body is, you change your experience. If you are sharing a conversation with someone, you're in the same room, recognizing that the way I see things, down to the colors and smells and sounds, might not be the same as what the other person is experiencing, even for the same shared objective reality. That can cultivate a bit of humility. And if we can cultivate a bit of humility about the most basic things, the redness, the solidity, without denying that stuff exists,
Yeah.
but the way I experience it is coming from within. To cultivate that humility, I think that can be extremely helpful and necessary. If we can have that about how we literally see, then maybe we can have that a little bit more about what we think and what we believe, and we can collectively start to mitigate some of these dynamics of polarization.
I think there's this, people sometimes often forget that the person you're having conflict with also has the trillions and trillions of experiences in their brain that they don't know either. And that we're constantly expecting somebody to know something or figure something out or to be to blame. But unless you're fighting a computer and losing to Deep Blue in a chess match, this person also has all these chemicals and hormones flying around.
That's right. I mean, we project color into things that just reflect light, that doesn't have color. We project understanding into ChatGPT that probably doesn't have it. And we'll project all kinds of things into the minds of other people. Yeah. I mean, that's the price we pay for communication. Right? Words are fundamentally limited in, even for the most articulate person, I think they're limited in the fidelity with which they can convey what's in another person's mind. And of course, maybe that's for the best. Now, if we could actually tell what was going on in another person's mind, maybe communication would be not only redundant, but social relations would get a whole lot more problematic.
But I feel like if your brain is some version of an experience machine, you can tweak it.
Yeah.
You can change behaviors.
That's possible, and I think it can be very liberating. And one of the things that I struggled with years ago is depression. Mm-hmm. And
serious depression too.
Serious depression. Yeah. And one of the ways in which that manifests is you experience the world in a different way. You know, everything seems in some very hard to describe way shorn of possibility. Mm-hmm. You know, you're channeled down a route which is only going in one direction, which is not good.
Right.
Your thoughts become channeled in the same way. And there's something, at least it's not a panacea, but there's something potentially liberating in recognizing that the way you experience the world and the self, including emotions, is not the only possible way. Mm-hmm. If it's a construction, if it's something that the brain is basically trying to make sense of what's going on, and you change the way it does that, or somebody else changes the way it does that, your experience can change too. It opens a space for change, even if it doesn't show you in itself how to make those changes.
Right. But that is possible, and if you change your experiences, if you read differently, if you connect with people. Did this help you?
It's hard to say because I don't have the comparison condition of somebody else who'd gone through the same thing. I think it did. It feels like it did. Yeah. And it feels like it did in the same way that some people say meditation can be very helpful. When you are a very experienced meditator, which I am not, by the way. I've meditated a bit, but I'm by no means a disciplined person at it. The thought there is that meditation, again, opens a space between the immediate experience in the here and now and all the brain's interpretations and follow-on thoughts that are triggered often by some root emotion. Mm-hmm. When you meditate and you're feeling anxious, then you can recognize perhaps that anxiety is manifest mainly in how your body feels, rather than a necessary destiny about how your life is going. Right. And just that recognition can give you some space in which therapy can work and in which you can work with yourself. Right. And I think much the same thing. Like, it's not that everything has been transformed by how I've been working to understand consciousness, but I'm sure many things have.
Right.
Now, I do have now this very automatic mental reflex when I'm just living in the world of occasionally catching myself and saying, well, what's actually happening? What's the relationship between what I'm experiencing and
Right.
what's going on? And that's always, I think that's a powerful habit. Now, we are problem-solving creatures, but we also have limitations. We're very bad about understanding consequences over long time periods. Or
that's the climate situation,
that's
right?
the climate situation, or things that are far away.
Yeah.
We have these biases too. And to the extent we can use technology to help us get around these biases, then that's fine.
Other things that are, just knowing what you know about the human brain and all your research, because you had mentioned the idea of corporations, and who are we going to give up our information to? Who's in control of all this? You look at social media now, you look at trends. We know that lies travel, X times faster than truth does. So does inspiration and hope. We have and we used to have them, but we would call them snake oil salesmen. We have this wave after wave of wellness grifters on social media, and these these men talking about you and this is who you are, you soldier, you lion. We're getting inundated with all this stuff. What do you think when you scroll through and see all this manipulation and influence that is out there right now in social media and the way the brain works with it?
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid it, and but I'm sure I still see a bunch of it, and I'm actively trying not to see it, which
Right.
makes it clear how pervasive this stuff can be. And in a sense, it's good that people have this drive to feeling better, to increasing well-being, and thinking of life and health not just as fixing illness, but as enhancing quality of life, enhancing health span, not just lifespan. I think that's good. But you're absolutely right. I mean, how do you distinguish the signal from the noise here? I think there is signal, and I think there are going to be some good things. In my own area of the brain, there's so much activity and so much heat and light and sound about nootropics and supplements that can enhance cognitive ability, and brain implants again further down the line. All of these things raise questions that are way beyond scientific questions. They're intensely difficult scientific questions about how any of this stuff actually works. A lot of it won't turn out to work at all.
Yeah.
And that can be known. I mean, that's just hard work. You need to do well-conducted experiments to see if these things that are supposed to make a difference actually do make a difference. Yeah. So that's the first thing, I think, right, is what's the evidence base for any of this? There can be a very, very compelling story, but unless there's a solid evidence base, then it's hard to have confidence however good the story is.
Right.
But then there are all these other questions about what level of change is desirable. How much do we want to change ourselves? Is that something that should just have no actual limit? And these other issues of, social equality, are we in danger of creating a cognitive overclass of people who have access to cognitively enhancing technologies?
That's going to be a lot to contend with. I like that we're at the beginning of this journey, though.
Yeah, I think it combines this journey of understanding consciousness really does balance a sense of progress with a sense, and there is this wider humility. Humility, again, is the right word here. I get a little exasperated when people pronounce with great confidence that they've solved the problem of consciousness and we understand it all. I don't think we do. I might be wrong about that. It might be there in plain sight, but I really don't think it is. And as we make progress towards it, I think we can help not only solve this really powerful existential challenge that where are we in the universe? What are we all doing here? But we can begin to make a difference in the day-to-day, in how we live with each other, in how we live with technology, in how we live with ourselves.
On a personal note for you, growing up in the 80s, biracial, UK, I'm just curious about all the experiences that pushed you, that made you become the person you are and be interested in this kind of thing. What was that like? What do you have memories of those times?
It's a good question, and it may have been part of why I became very fixated on understanding consciousness and the nature of the self. Growing up in the 80s, I grew up in rural Oxfordshire, so I was the only non-white person in the village, apart from my dad. Yeah. And when I went to high school, I think there were a handful of us out of 1,000 kids. It was not common, and there was I didn't experience it as racism. Kids bully each other, yeah. But that was how the general bullying took form. I mean, that was the obviously different thing about me because I have an Indian name as well, not just a different skin color. So that may have planted in me some seed of, like, who am I really? Like, my name doesn't feel like me in a sense because it's a name from a different culture. I don't even know how to pronounce it. When I go to India, I get corrected on how to pronounce my own name.
Yeah, so it's true because I've heard many versions, and when I talk to you, you're saying, I don't even know what it is. Like,
yeah, and I have to use it.
Did your dad tell you what it was? Like,
well, he said it in some way, but I don't. I mean, I can bring his. Maybe this is why I need an avatar of him. But then how do I know? The accent is the same. I don't know anymore. But I think I think every kid goes through this. Right? You must have gone through this too. Like this process in your teens. Who are you? Yeah. What distinguishes you from other people? How do you fit in? Yeah. I think most especially. And that may have been a bit more acute because of my biracial experience. Yeah. But in England, it was noticeable how quickly everything changed. For the good, in some ways. In the 1990s, it was totally different. I went to university in the 1990s. Suddenly, being mixed race was great. It was very cool. And, a lot of culture was referencing being inspired by Asian music, food. Huge amounts of mixed cuisine. Where is this dish? Is it Indian? Is it English? Is it is it both? So there's chicken tikka masala is sort of as an English dish in India because it was. It was invented to cater to the taste of English people. Right. So then it's become enriching.
I remember I was in radio when I was in my mid-20s when Corner Shop single came out, and how novel it was. And what a big moment that actually was. And I don't think a lot of people who are listening to radio really fully realize how important that was. And I interviewed subsequently people who are South Asian and from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. It mattered.
Yeah, it mattered. Yeah. I remember that. We have this radio show in the UK called Desert Island Discs, where you take your, I think it's 8 most meaningful tracks, and that's what you're going to take to your desert island for the rest of your life. And Corner Shop's Brimful of Asher would definitely be on that list.
So when you first heard it, you must have had a reaction to it.
Yeah. I don't remember. It wasn't like a flashbulb memory that I remember where I was when I listened to it, but. It made an impact. It really made an impact, and I listened to it a lot. And I don't hear it very often now, but whenever I do, it's a track that has an immediate emotional effect on me, and a positive one.
And as you end the book with, not to give it away, but mystery. There's power in mystery, isn't there?
There's power and motivation, and there are grades of mystery. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty confident that an explanation of consciousness is possible, but I'm also confident, as we said earlier, the questions will change. Yeah. Like we put different criteria on this particular mystery because we're trying to explain us. Mm-hmm. And so we expect an explanation of consciousness to make intuitive sense in a way we don't even ask of other sciences. If I try to explain quantum mechanics to you, which I couldn't do because I don't really understand it either.
You could make it up and I'd believe you because I wouldn't know.
We would, as long as it worked, it worked. And we don't expect to be able to understand it, but somehow we expect these things to line up. And I'm interested in that. I don't really know what to think about that yet, besides being skeptical of the assumption that an explanation of consciousness has to give you this aha moment for it to be valid. It may not be.
What do you eat? What do you drink? Do you do anything for your brain? Like, because that's a big part. You brought up nootropics for the stomach. We hear about adaptogens. We hear about both those. What do you do to feed a healthy brain?
Yeah, I probably not as much as I should. I did it when I was in the throes of long COVID. I paid much more attention than I'd ever done before, and I tried to have a diet that was low in inflammatory compounds, which involved cutting out a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't want to cut out, but also spinach. Like, since when was spinach ever bad for you?
When I'm hearing spinach and kale are bad for you, and I'm like, come on.
Kale also now?
Yeah, because
I mean,
apparently
now the world really makes no sense.
Yeah, so it's too fucking much. But I'm eating a lot of mushrooms, which I never
Right.
used to,
Right.
because I think I've been influenced by all this shit, which is telling me it's good for your brain.
Yeah. It's striking that balance again, isn't it? So I think you can go the whole hog and spend all your income on this and that supplement, which I think is not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But there are some basic, simple things I think you can do, and I don't live by these rules at all. You know, but I try to have oily fish a couple of times a week.
Yeah.
I will take fish oil supplements. I'll take a few supplements, just because it's easy and it's these ones are not bank breaking. And okay, why not? They're probably they might help. That they might, but they might not. And if not, no harm done.
It's your experience anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
George, thank you.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.